Thank you. I want to thank, first of all, the Snuneymuxw First Nation for their continued welcome to their territory and the stewardship of their beautiful land where we are. I was so moved by listening to National Chief Sean Atleo this morning as he linked empathy to respect. He didn't say that we had to have a relationship that was all lovey-dovey. In fact, I have a really good friend from the Curve Lake First Nation named Alice Williams, and she said, we have to build a new relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. It doesn't have to be lovey-dovey, but it does have to be built on respect. And I think when you empathize with somebody, when you walk a mile in their moccasins, you understand what's going on inside them. You feel for them. And you hear them differently. You receive them differently. And that's what I would like to explore a little bit today. I've always loved words, and I think it's because I've always had difficulty with them. When I was a kid, I was mildly dyslexic, which probably means as an adult, I'm still mildly dyslexic. But what I love is doing those scramblers, you know, that you see in the newspaper. I can do them in seconds because I see the word arriving out of the mess immediately. Take, for example, dyslexia. Do you know what you can do with that if you throw all the letters up in the air? You can have daily sex. You really can. And another thing I really love, I'm talking about the words, not daily sex, although, you know. The eyes, when you mess up the letters, you get, they see, the eyes, they see. And when you look at the word heart, 3/5 of that word is ear. And I think the ear and the heart are so, so connected. When we hear each other's stories, it connects us to each other. You may remember your math classes. I barely remember mine, but I do remember this. When two circles intersect, that lovely spot in between that we share so much. I think we share much more than what divides us. But that was Venn diagrams. And I think we can all Venn diagram with each other. Through the TED morning, we've already seen ways that we can do that. Being taught by a baby, looking at a mirror image where other people are reflected in ours. It's just incredible. So I love to play with words. I love the idea of the words that form things like witness. I think we are all called to be witnesses to the human experience, to what's going on with our neighbor and our friends and our family and our community. And a beautiful, beautiful thing about witness is that it relates to an Old English word, inwit, which was about testifying with a clean heart. And witnessing is about having a clean heart. Bearing witness is something else too. I think what bearing witness calls us to do is to help carry each other's stories, to help carry each other's pain. And a few years ago, I was asked to do that by a commissioner from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. In a nutshell, their mission statement is to receive and record the stories of the students who attended residential school, the survivors of residential school, to hear their stories, to help them set their spirits free by lifting the burden of these stories, and with that, pave the way for reconciliation. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is only here for another year and a half, and then their mandate will be over. And it will be up to us to take these stories with us and build a better country. And I was asked by Commissioner Marie Wilson to join a circle of honorary witnesses. And these are people who they figure have connections in their lives. And I guess I do. I have a national radio program. I'm very lucky. And take the stories to the people that you know. There was an old shampoo commercial for Fabergé, you tell two people and you tell two people and so on and so on and so on, and the stories will be carried exponentially. And that's what we're trying to do. I had no idea what the stories would be like that I was about to hear from former residential school survivors. Like many Canadians, I was completely ignorant of this part of our history, and that was, to boil this down, taking children away from loving families and communities, often transplanting them far, far away into schools that their families couldn't reach, say on a weekend or even at Christmas holidays. And the kids go in and they can't speak the language. And if they speak their own language, they are punished. The abuses that have happened to these children who are now adults, who are now parents, who are now grandparents and great-grandparents, and a whole generation, many generations have been affected by this. You've heard about the awful abuses that range from sexual, social, spiritual, emotional, physical. There was also cultural. When you take someone's language from them, you take everything. Imagine yourself as a 5-year-old going up the stairs into a great big gray colossal building when you've been living out on the land for your whole life. You don't even know how to walk on concrete. And then you can't speak your language. And if you do, you are punished for it. Imagine being that little child. And then imagine that child becoming a parent. A child who'd had no love and lots of punishment as they were growing up and receiving an education. But it wasn't really an education. It was something else altogether. It was an extermination. The Minister of Indian Affairs, Duncan Campbell Scott, said that we will kill the Indian in the child. This was all about assimilation and extermination of culture and loving communities. So that's the broad social picture. And I knew that as a journalist, but I didn't begin to understand it until I heard individuals speaking about their experience. And they would sit down in front of the commissioners and 800 other witnesses, including the honorary witnesses, and tell their story. And there was one woman who said, I want to call my 3 daughters up here because in all the time that they were growing up, I never told them that I loved them. I never hugged them. And I want to do that now. And so they came up and they received her love. And a lot of us were pretty messy watching. I was trying not to sob, but I couldn't help it. My training says don't do that as a journalist. You don't do that. You just observe, but you couldn't if you were human. And all of a sudden I felt an arm around me, and I looked into the eyes of an Inuit man named Jackie. He had a name tag. He was a social support worker. And he offered me Kleenex and a bottle of water, and he sat beside me until I calmed down. And a little later on, I spoke to a woman named Alma Poitras at another gathering, and she was a First Nations woman from Saskatchewan. And I told her I felt such shame as a Canadian. And she took me and she hugged me. She was a social support worker too. And as I looked into her eyes, I wanted to know, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And she looked back and said, I see you. And right after this moment with Alma Poitras, I went back into the great big gathering at Saskatoon, and there was Alma Poitras getting up on the stage to give her statement as a survivor, after she had given me comfort for feeling shame for what my ancestors and past Canadians had done to her people. because I didn't feel anymore that it was her people. I felt it was us. And she got up, and she didn't talk about her experience. What she said, and this was empathy on two legs. She said, we've all gone through such problems, but I really want to salute the men here. Women talk to each other about these issues. Men don't. So the men who got up to tell their stories, she saluted them while she was carrying her own burden. Shame is an interesting thing. And sometimes it can really slow you down. But I think if you explore it and find out why you're feeling what you're feeling, it's a really good thing to do. Look at our history. You don't see this stuff in the history books. It's starting to come. We've got to push it into curriculums right across the country. But we've got to know where we came from so that we can know where we're going to get to. And it could be a beautiful place if we walk together. The way to do this is to engage. And before Marie Wilson became a commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, she held an engagement party where she invited 6 non-Aboriginal women and 6 Aboriginal women. And we talked about what we wanted the TRC to do. And really what we wanted them to do was to heal Canada. Because if we don't come together, non-Aboriginals and Aboriginals, us with the people who are here first, our soul is at stake. And listening to the stories I've heard at the TRC gatherings, which we are all welcome to, and there's one coming up in Vancouver in September, and I hope you'll be there. We feel what's happened to them. The stories come from the mouths of adults, but it's children speaking. And we help to carry the pain. So don't miss that opportunity to engage. In fact, don't miss any opportunity to engage. I went shopping about a year and a half ago with my good friend and fellow Gabriolan, Margie Gilmore. And we were in Toronto. It was January, and it was really icy. And I was dressed in a pair of leggings and boots with good treads and a nice little duffel coat. And I went into this store, and I found something I'd been searching for forever. An ook pick. An ook pick, a real ook pick, made by Mrs. Jessie Snowball of Fort Chimo, now known as Kuujjuaq. Of course, many of you might remember this as the ook pick. This is what happens to an ook pick when a toy company gets a hold of it. But I love ook picks. I had one when I was a kid. And when I found this, I was absolutely vibrating. I was so happy. And in the middle of my reverie, I heard a voice say, "Hey, great legs." And I looked down. And I said, "Thank you." And the guy across the shelf said, "Huh?" And I said, "Well, didn't you just say I have great legs?" And he said, "No. My friend and I here are looking at a map, and we know it's of the Great Lakes." And so Margie and I introduced ourselves to Wyatt and to John, and they were both Anishinaabe men, and we chatted with them for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we all had to go our separate ways. I went up to pay for my ook pick, which was priced at $2.49. Yeah, I know. And the woman at the cash said, $2.49 for this? You've got to be kidding. And I thought, oh my goodness, she's on eBay too. And she knows you can get $100 for this guy. She gave it to me for 49 cents. And just as I was leaving, I felt a tap on the shoulder, and it was Wyatt. And Wyatt said, "I just want to say thank you for talking to me." And I thought, why on earth wouldn't I talk to you? My thought cloud said, "You're hot." But much more importantly, my heart said, "You're lovely. You're human. We're in this together." And as Margie and I prepared to go out the door, I heard a voice through a megaphone that said, "Hey, Great Legs, you be careful out there, because if you slip and fall, you won't have great legs anymore." I have taken this story that Wyatt gave me into my heart and carried it along. Wyatt, I don't know if I'll ever see him again, but I think of him every single day. And I think about these paper bags of Kleenex that they collect at the TRC. They are our tears. And they aren't thrown out. They're actually taken to a sacred fire, and they are burnt. And then the ashes from one sacred fire, say Winnipeg, are then taken to Inuvik, and the ashes from Inuvik then go to Halifax and then to Saskatoon, and Saskatoons will go to Vancouver. Montreal first, and then Vancouver. And this is like this beautiful kind of wind that blows low along the ground, and it will pick up, say, a pile of leaves or a pile of snow, or let's say some ashes, and spread them farther along the ground to another pile, and the pile gets bigger. And the Inuit have a word for that, and it's naturuviatuk. And it describes that very kind of wind that goes low along the ground and will take something, a pile of something, and then make it bigger. And I think when we share our stories and we are silent so that we can listen, and we take the ear and transplant it down to our heart, then we become the naturuviatuk. We can really hear the stories. We can really engage, and we can be heard and seen and felt and loved. Thank you.